Hello, everyone. For the next few days, I will be releasing several stories I had the pleasure of narrating for an audiobook. If you want to hear exclusive stories only found in the audiobook narrated by myself in the Dark Somnium, there are links in the description for the audiobook and a physical copy of the book that you can get for yourself. My name is Delphine Gael Dubois. Though my family insists that I was named after my grandmama, it has always perplexed me as her name wasn't Delphine or Gael. Whenever I questioned this, the response was always the same. Your other grandmama, the one you don't know about. One of my cousins once shared a rumor that Delphine was the name of a woman my mother loved before meeting my father. Another relative, my uncle, revealed that Gael was the name of my father's best friend. A friend who was one night found slumped against the side of a decrepit building, a needle protruding from his lifeless arm. I never received a clear answer from my father, who passed away on my 12th birthday, leaving me with a mix of tears and cake, devastated by the loss of her one true love. My mother sent me off to boarding school in search of his replacement. The day I got out was the same day she decided to follow my father into the afterlife. So no answer from her either, I suppose. My cousins told me it was a broken heart that took her life. But personally, I believed it was the razor blade found next to the bathtub. That's what called me to such a location, standing outside a large, dusty tomb, attending my mother's funeral. It was the large, dusty tomb, considering that my last name was branded over the doorway. This tomb was our birthright, or, more fittingly, our death right. However, as I looked at the decrepit old structure, I knew it wasn't really ours. The official lineage of Dubois was far removed from our own humble family. We were nothing more than a small branch off the main family tree. But it seemed Dad apparently had just enough blood to earn him passage into the family crypt upon his death. My mother, being married to my father, was also given the option to be buried in the family crypt, given that she wouldn't have been able to afford a burial plot half as nice as this one with her meager earnings. She chose the more expensive option. Surrounding me were family members that were also estranged from the more prominent line of Dubois. They were my cousins, uncles, aunts, and nephews. They were family. My kin offered their condolences, giving me pats on the back and comforting words. While I appreciated their sympathy, deep down I knew that it wasn't really necessary. I loved my mother. Years of proximity had a way of doing that, but the bond between us had died not long after my father's passing. The first few drops of rain began to fall, landing softly on my head. Several black umbrellas opened to shield their owners from the rain. Predictably, I had forgotten mine, even though someone had warned me about the possibility of foul weather. The gravekeeper, a thin and gaunt man who resembled the corpses he and his family had been tending to for generations, unlocked the massive stone doors to the crypt. Pushing his whole weight against the doors, he still resisted as they swung open, creaking loudly. 4 men, tasked by the keeper, carried my mother's small casket and hoisted it up before stepping inside the pitch-black crypt. As the closest relative to my mother, I was the first to follow them inside. The keeper reached into his bucket and retrieved a torch, luckily still dry within the doorway, and handed it to me. Other attendees entered and surrendered their umbrellas, receiving a torch in return, bringing much-needed light into the dimly lit crypt. The crypt itself was a grand square room with walls that held the remains of some of the earliest members of the Dubois family. 3 hallways branched out from the main chamber, each leading deeper into the earth. The gravekeeper lit the final torch for himself and took the lead, turning towards the hallway on the left. This was where my mother was to be buried, and where we, most of the attendees included, would eventually be buried as well. The left hallway was reserved for the lesser Dubois, those who were not as prominent in the family's history. The middle and right hallways belonged to the Dubois, who were worth a damn, at least according to their own opinions. The narrow hallway on the left was a tight squeeze for the unshaven and ashen-faced men carrying my mother. We followed in silence behind them, the gravekeeper and my mother's lifeless body. However, the cramped corridor was far from silent. The sound of high heels and stiff footwear echoed off the walls, bouncing from left to right in such an obnoxious manner that it was impossible to locate their origin. The casket carriers, particularly the men at the upper right of the coffin, breathed heavily and grunted as they struggled to lift the 100-pound woman in her 108-pound box. Even the popping and cracking of the torches seemed too loud, as if competing to be the loudest sound in the room. The cacophony left no room for thought. The mindless feelings of hollowness began to creep back into my body without the excuse to lose myself in my own mind. As we moved along, I found myself eye to eye with the coffin in front of me, given the casket carriers were tall, and I was not. Had it been possible to see through wood, I would have been able to see my mother's feet, adorned with her favorite white stilettos. The longer I stared ahead, the more vivid those white stilettos became, as we abruptly turned down a hallway, descending even deeper into the earth. I tore my gaze away from the coffin and looked instead at the muddy boots of the men carrying it. As we made our way down a now wider hallway, a sense of recognition washed over me. The flickering of light from my torch revealed name plaques on the walls, and with each passing one, tears threatened to spill from my eyes. Alexander Armando Dubois, Marie Dubois, Alexis Clark Dubois, my grandparents and their grandparents before them, my great aunts, my stillborn cousins. Approaching the end of the hallway, my limbs felt heavy and my heart sank. The tears flowed freely as I saw my father's name next to a brand new plaque that had been made for my mother, Clara Dubois. The burial was far from ceremonial. My mother's casket was simply placed in a hole in the wall. No comforting words were spoken by the priest, who had already fulfilled his duties above ground. So we stood there, in the flicker of torchlight, looking at the nameplate embedded in the old stone wall. The gravekeeper and his men lingered awkwardly, attempting to allow enough time to mourn, so that they didn't appear rude when they left. The first to depart were my older cousins, taking with them some of the light that illuminated the crypt. Following suit, the casket bearers left, which I found unsettling since they had outlasted my cousins. Then, my aunts and uncles ascended to the surface, leaving only 3 torches burning in the dark passageway. The gravekeeper, my youngest uncle, and me. I had hoped to keep my composure until it was just me and the gravekeeper, but my resolve crumbled, and I collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably like a child. The gravekeeper looked away, and my Uncle Theo knelt down to embrace me, his arm around my shoulder. I'll admit, my sobs were not dignified, nor were they attractive, and they certainly weren't welcome as I sat on the floor, surrounded by the bodies of my closest family members. Uncle Theo and the gravekeeper waited patiently, and eventually my crying quieted to occasional whimpering. But even patience and understanding have their limits. Uncle Theo glanced at his watch and rose to his feet. "I'm sorry, Delphine. I must go now," he said, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "If you need anything, I'm here for you." He offered a tired smile and then disappeared into the darkness, taking the light of his torch with him. The gravekeeper looked at me with expectation, then with hope, and when he realized that I had no intention of following my uncle out of the tomb, he cleared his throat and spoke in a raspy, tired voice. "Please do not take offense, madam, but I have other duties to attend to and would like to lock the doors," he said. It took my brain longer than it should have to understand the meaning of his words. When it finally did, I looked up at him, the tears covering my face enough to cause him to break eye contact. "I am sorry, sir. Could you leave me for a bit longer? I can see myself out when I'm finished." The gravekeeper fumbled with the keys around his belt as he looked around nervously. "I'm not supposed to leave anyone unattended," he said. I understand what he meant. The real Dubois did not want anyone unsupervised in their tomb. "Please," I choked. "I do not want to leave yet." I could see the gravekeeper's heart break a little at my words. He looked around, as if checking to see if there was anyone who could get him in trouble. "I'll come back in 1 hour to lock the doors," he whispered. "Thank you. I will be long gone by then, I promise." I tried to smile. "I will still walk a ways to see if I can spot your torch. It's always better to be safe," he said as he shook his head. The last flicker of light in the vast crypt was that of my own torch. I leaned it against the wall and continued to gaze at my mother's plaque. The silence of it all but my own flame reignited my thoughts, but I found myself without anything to think about. So I stood there gazing at her name with an empty, hollow mind. After a while, I rose to my feet and reached out to touch my parents' plaques, whispering that I hoped it would be a long time before I saw them again. As I wiped my tears with my sleeve, I grabbed my torch and began to walk back down the corridor. I turned at the first left I came across and re-entered the main left hallway. Or was it? I looked around but couldn't recognize my surroundings. Stepping back into the hallway containing my family, I realized that the main corridor was 100 yards up at the next left turn. Just as I began walking forward, curiosity took hold, and I looked back at the corridor I had mistakenly entered. What was that? I wondered. I retraced my steps to the strange hallway, waving my torch around to no avail, revealing no shining plaques or caskets bearing the Dubois name. I advanced further into the corpseless corridor, feeling a surprising amount of confidence under the light of my torch. What was this place? A forgotten section of the crypt, left abandoned and undiscovered? As I continued on, my theory began to take shape. The holes in the wall seemed incomplete, and upon closer inspection, I realized that some of them hadn't even been started. The wall itself seemed to give way to the earth, leading me to a sudden halt against a massive dirt barrier. I waved my torch around, but saw no way to continue. With a heavy sigh, I realized this was nothing more than an abandoned, incomplete corridor, forgotten by time. Turning on my heel with a sense of defeat, I began retracing my steps, eager to escape this dark and desolate corner of the massive crypt. As I made my way back, my eyes failed to catch the hole in the dirt floor. The hole was invisible, perfectly blending with the surrounding darkness. My foot slipped through the opening, causing my body to lurch forward and downward. A scream escaped my lips as I hit my head on the hard ground. Dazed and disoriented, I reached out to pull my leg free, but my hands found no purchase in the crumbling dirt. Instead, I felt myself being pulled downward by gravity, over half of my body slipping through the ever-widening hole. A frantic attempt to free myself, I pushed my hands against the edge of the opening, but to my horror, my hands went through the dirt, causing me to lose my grip and slip through the ever-growing void. My forehead hit the edge of the hole, and my right leg hung safely over the edge, saving me from a terrifying fall. With the torch still in my hand, I slowly became aware of the darkness below me, deep and endless. How big was this hole? The thought flickered briefly through my mind, before the dirt gave way completely, and I was consumed by the abyss. I awoke to darkness. At first, I felt nothing, but then the pain returned, and with each passing moment, it grew stronger. Every movement sent waves of agony throughout my entire body, making me unable to scream despite the urge to do so. "Delphine, calm down," I thought to myself. Find out what's wrong with you. I tried wiggling my toes, and though my left toes moved poorly, they responded to my commands. A sense of relief washed over me as I flexed my left fingers, revealing they still had functioned. But when I tried to do the same with my right hand, there was nothing. No movement, no response. Panic gripped me as I desperately tried to feel my right fingers, but there was no sensation. As my senses gradually returned, I became painfully aware that the source of the majority of the agony was my right arm. My attempt to shift my position revealed the horrifying truth. I was lying on my own arm, twisted and contorted to the point where I was resting on my own shoulder. The pain escalated to an unbearable level, causing my entire body to convulse as I cried out in absolute anguish. In a desperate attempt to numb the pain, I tried biting the inside of my cheek, only to end up biting through it and filling my mouth with blood. My torch was gone, lost to the darkness. Had it burned out as I plummeted into the abyss? Or had I been unconscious for so long that it had simply gone out? Looking upwards, all I could see was an endless expanse of darkness, with no trace of the hole through which I had fallen. If the drop had been as long as it felt, how was I still alive? The pain was excruciating, and tears streamed down my face. Did I even want to be alive? Would it have been better if I died on impact? Then it hit me like a brick wall. I wanted to live. Despite the pain, I was going to live. My teeth were clenched so firmly that I feared I might break one, but I forced myself to breathe. Focusing on my breathing did little to alleviate the agony, but it helped to bring a sense of calm to my mind. Despite the dire situation, some hope remained. The gravekeeper would come back for me, and even if he didn't, someone would eventually notice me missing and come looking for me. But as I lay there in the darkness, a new thought wormed its way into my mind. Would anyone even notice I was missing? How long would it take for my family members to become concerned and start searching for me? The idea of being trapped here until the next Dubois died filled me with dread. Surely it wouldn't take that long for someone to find me, would it? With that grim thought on my mind, I lay still and stared into the nothingness. The pain persisted, unrelenting, but slowly I gained the ability to manage it. I refused to be a broken object, resigned to the fate of slipping away. No, I would fight to regain my strength. With each breath, I focused my mind and steeled my will. Inhale, exhale. I attempted to lift my head, but my body trembled with the effort, unable to raise even an inch. Undeterred, I tried again a few minutes later. Inhale, exhale. I pushed with every ounce of strength I could muster, and this time my head lifted ever so slightly before falling back down. Despite the overwhelming pain, this was a glimmer of hope, and I felt a small smile tug at the corners of my lips. With this progress, I knew that in just a few hours, I could be back on my feet once more. Every few minutes, I attempted to move my body a little more, and bit by bit, more of my body began to fall back under my control. Eventually, I was able to sit up. After another half hour of painstaking practice, I finally managed to rise to my feet. But as I did so, I felt a sharp pain shoot up my left ankle. My body could no longer support its weight, and I collapsed to the floor, face first. As I collided with the cold ground, a clump of my hair stuck to my face, wet as if I had just stepped out of the shower. With my left arm, I removed the wet hair from my face. Tracing the strand back to the back of my head, my hand came back soaked. My eyes were slowly adjusting to my surroundings, but I still couldn't tell the color of my hand. However, I had a sinking suspicion that it was red. I shook my head, forcing myself to push aside the concern for then. My focus was on walking. My focus had to be on walking. On the second attempt, I managed to rise to my feet much more successfully than before. Though I stumbled slightly, I regained my balance and stood on my own two legs, favoring the right one over the left. I straightened my back and stood tall, feeling such pride after accomplishing something that most would have found so simple.
It stands! Only 2 tries necessary.
A voice echoed out. I let out a shriek, turning to face the voice at the cost of my hard-earned balance, and fell back to the ground.
It falls!
Another voice hissed.
It fell due to external circumstances. Had it not been hindered by our sudden presence, it would have continued standing.
A third voice stated.
You can't prove that claim. The only reality available to us is that it fell after the second attempt at rising. It has yet to attempt a third.
The second voice countered. I pushed myself backward, away from the voices, until I felt something solid stop me in my tracks. Fear enveloped me, and I forced myself to face whatever was ahead of me. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to sound unafraid and failing in the same breath. The voices in the darkness quieted, leaving me with no idea where they were coming from. I narrowed my eyes and peered into the darkness, shapes slowly becoming visible. Boulders? The cave seemed to be filled with them. At the edge of my vision, something resembling a pillar rose from the ground, disappearing far beyond the distance of my sight. As hard as I looked, I couldn't see any people standing in the darkness. "Who are you?" I screeched. The darkness replied with a voice like rocks being smashed together.
My, its vocal cords are still strong,
it said.
Almost to the point of annoyance.
Another voice chimed in. "Please," I begged. "Tell me where we are." The voices fell silent once again.
We are here,
one of the voices said, and I thought I caught a glimpse of a figure where the sound emanated. "Where is here?" I asked, my teeth gritted.
Here is what there is. Here is where we are.
Another voice responded. The voices were utterly inhuman, devoid of any recognizable tone or rhythm, that I couldn't even tell if they were human or not. "Stop talking like that and give me a straight answer," I groaned, my fear of the figures in the darkness momentarily replaced by annoyance.
Then do not speak. Upon speaking, we have no choice but to interpret your words and form a reply, even if the reply is not to your liking,
one of them stated.
It appears to be confused with the concept of here.
Its inability to perceive here is of its own concern.
"Please," I begged. "Please help me." The group of voices fell silent, and in its place, I heard the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps. They were coming closer to me. Though I had wished for some company in this cavern, there was something deeply unsettling about those people. As a barely visible silhouette emerged from the darkness, I noticed something strange about their knot and jagged appearance, something that my mind struggled to comprehend. 2 other figures followed closely behind the first. Stay away!" I cried out.
First, it's please help me, and now it's stay away.
One of the rear figures sneered. The lead figure lifted a hand in a calming gesture, as if soothing a frightened dog.
We're taking you to the others. We'll help you understand.
I tried to protest, but my efforts were cut short as the first figure grabbed my broken arm and forcibly lifted me to my feet, causing me to cry out in agony. Despite my pleas for them to stop, the figure continued to march me forward, deeper into the darkness. Every step sent waves of unbearable pain through my body. "Please, it hurts so much," I begged, my voice barely above a whisper as I struggled to remain conscious.
You're struggling with the concept of here,
the figure whispered, as if he did not want the others to hear.
Here is all there
in a last desperate attempt to halt our march. I reached out and gripped the figure's forearm with my remaining strength. As I struggled to stay conscious, I sensed the solidness of bone beneath my grip. The world around me blurred as darkness overcame me. As consciousness returned, a shiver coursed through my spine, realizing that I had been dragged deeper into the lightless cavern. But the chilling darkness was the least of my concerns. As my senses sharpened, I found myself surrounded by countless shadowy figures, with knot and jagged appearances, not unlike those who had brought me here. Despite the shadows, I could make out their differing heights, which only intensified my dread. The cave felt suffocating, the air thick. Then my trembling gaze landed on one of the largest figures, seated eerily nearby. In that moment, I was grateful that the darkness spared me the details of its appearance. A cacophony of hushed voices echoed through the cavern, voices blending and distorting. They were not speaking to me, but rather to each other, in a voice that seemed both ancient and unnatural, filled with fear and racked with pain. I found myself overwhelmed by my own questions, uncertain of where to start. The darkness seemed to press in, suffocating me as I strained to make out the figures surrounding me. The nearest form looped larger than the rest, sending shivers down my spine. Summoning my courage, I managed to speak, though my voice trembled. "Who are you?" I asked the large outline directly ahead of me. It cocked its head, an eerie motion in the dim light, but wasted no time in answering my question.
Well, I am one among many, of course,
It replied, the words oozing with an unsettling calmness. The figure's response left me no less bewildered than before, and the surrounding darkness seemed to mock my lack of understanding. As I struggled to rise to my feet, my groans betrayed my weakened state to the watching figures. Could I make a run for it? The idea seemed absurd since I could barely stand on my own 2 feet. With a slight shake in my good left hand, I realized that I would have to resort to my only remaining option. I knew I had to talk to them, despite the fear gnawing at my gut. I knew I had to try. "And the many are here?" I cautiously asked, my voice echoing off the cavern walls as I waited for their response.
of course.
Another jagged voice croaked, followed by,
It is not as dull as we are led to believe. Just wait.
the figure I believed I had encountered earlier interjected. "So, here is all there is?" I repeated, trying to grasp the meaning behind their answers.
Correct.
One of them said. "So, what is all there is?" I pressed, my voice revealing the rapid beating of my heart.
A fair question.
Remarked one of the jagged figures.
All there is everything we can perceive.
Added another, their words hanging heavy in the following silence. "But it is not all I can perceive," I dared to say, feeling the sense of unease growing within me. The shadowy figures began to murmur their disapproval, causing my hand to tremble even more. If I wanted to get out of this cavern alive, it seemed I would have to play this bizarre game of semantics and choose my words with utmost care. As far as I knew, breaking even a single eggshell could mean my death.
What do you perceive?
Asked the large one seated before me, its voice like a shovel against rocks. "I fell into this place from above. Up there. I saw many things that do not exist here, and yet I still perceived them," I replied, feeling beads of sweat forming on my brow. When the large figure spoke again, its words echoing through the hollow space, each syllable seemed to carry weight.
Your perception of the world above was but a dream, a falsity, of perception. Here, reality is unapologetically real. There are no illusions in death.
In death? I whispered, feeling nauseous as I tried to forget the bone I had felt earlier.
Look upon us. It is clear to see.
A voice insisted from the crowd. I can't see you, I stammered, feeling that it was a truth I should have kept hidden.
It can only see from its eyes,
Came another voice, its tone filled with disapproval. As the shadowy figures continued their conversation, my attention remained fixed on the large one, who had risen from its seated position and started to move about in the darkness. Despite the searing pain in my right arm and shoulder, my fear of the unknown surpassed it all. I couldn't imagine what these creatures had in store for me. I didn't want to. Yet, in the depths of this darkness, where the line between nightmare and reality blurred, I found myself at the mercy of the unknowable. And then, without warning, a searing burst of light pierced the darkness, causing me to turn my head and lose balance, falling harshly onto the unforgiving floor I was quickly growing to detest. When my vision cleared, I found the towering figure of the large creature looming over me. A wave of terror washed over me as I realized what it was. A skeleton. A cry escaped my lips, different from the ones of pain previous, and I frantically glanced around at all the figures surrounding me. They were all skeletons, a mixture of twisted, rotted, and moldy bones, with bits of tattered clothing hanging off each of them. It was like staring at a grotesque interpretation of the human form, crafted by a macabre artist. Filled with panic to escape their gaze, I scrambled backward. But the cold, unforgiving floor, along with my mangled body, offered no chance for escape. The fleshless forms watched me in silence as my breaths became strained, and I felt as if I were choking. They watched me panic and flail, making no move towards me to tear me apart. If anything, their expressionless skulls seemed to radiate a sense of disappointment. Various impractical and half-formed thoughts rushed through my mind, but one heartfelt truth stood above the rest. I am not dead. I do not belong here. My voice was weak, almost inaudible, and I doubted they had even heard me.
Of course you are dead.
One of the cadavers began.
If you are here, then you are dead.
Shaking my head, I spoke again despite the disorientation it caused. I am alive! My voice, once trembling with fear, grew stronger, and I hoped my cavern peers would mistake it for authority rather than the desperation it was. My heart still beats, my lungs still fill with air. I am not dead!
That is unimportant,
replied one of the many voices.
Life is an illusion. Death is the reality. It is inescapable,
said another. Though my mouth was dry and chapped, I persisted. I am not dead yet! I still have time before my end. You cannot say that my current self belongs down here for something my future self will become. If I needed to adopt philosophy to stand against these counterfeit philosophers, I knew I stood a fair chance in this coliseum of discourse. There is not a person alive or dead that can outtalk Delphine Gael Dubois.
Time holds little value here. When there is no measure of it, there is no difference between the you of now and the you of time to come. What will you become is what you are, and in that, you are no different from us,
hissed the large skeleton, with a rusted sword lodged in its ribcage, towering above all the others. My resolve briefly faltered at their contorted reasoning, but I was far from finished. We are not the same. Just as you are your own unique person, so am I. No matter what happens, I am still Delphine Gael
Names hold no meaning here, especially once you've forgotten your own,
interrupted one of the skeletons.
We are not unique. We are one of many,
added another voice from the crowd. Frustrated and angry, I cried out to the Council of Corpses. So what is this supposed to be? Hell?
Heaven and hell. The two are indistinguishable. There is merely here,
said the large skeleton. So your claim is that there's no difference between heaven and hell? I prodded, my voice echoing off the cavern walls.
An example will be given. Amongst our numbers we have two, one of which was a deliverer of grand and righteous deeds, and the other of which was a proprietor of foul and evil acts. However, neither one can recall which one they were, and in essence, there is no true difference between the two.
I slowly and painfully lifted myself off the ground, smiling as I regained my footing, pointing at the sword lodged in the skeleton's ribs. Uniqueness still exists in this place. Are you not the only one here with a sword in your chest? The large skeleton peered down at the withered handle protruding from its body, muttering,
a keepsake. I no longer recall whether it was plunged into me by another or by my own hand. A trinket as pointless as the flesh still clinging to your body.
So you say there is flesh on my body? I questioned.
Yes,
replied the large skeleton. Yet you claim I am no different from you? I challenged.
a minor difference. Unworthy of consideration.
The large skeleton retorted. But you still recognize it. Does that not separate me from the others, even if it is trivial? I persisted. The large skeleton remained silent, and several other skeletons in the crowd murmured among themselves. I have a question, I cautiously broached. Is there an entrance to this cavern? The crowd fell silent, and after a pause, one of the skeletons spoke up.
No. Here is all there is. This is where the dead reside.
I paused, took a deep breath, and then posed another question. Would it be hypothetically possible for the many to lift one out of the hole that I fell down? The many skeletons spoke. They debated. They considered. Finally, one of the skeletons stepped forward.
Though movement is infrequent, we could lift one to such a height. But such a venture would be pointless.
Another skeleton objected.
For this is where the dead reside.
The horrid pain in my bloody and throbbing arm and shoulder provided a strange sense of relief. They signified that I was still alive. A grin involuntarily spread across my face. So lifting me up would be pointless because I'm already dead? I asked the Council of Corpses.
Correct,
came the reply. Even though my heart beats, I'm dead because there's not enough perceivable time for me to be alive? I pressed.
Agreed,
replied one skeleton. So tell me, I demanded, turning to face the largest skeleton, positioned at the center of his bony brethren. Why did you light that fire? The cave fell into an eerie silence as all the eyeless skulls turned towards the large skeleton, waiting for a response.
To grant you sight,
came the answer from the large one. But I'm already dead, I replied innocently.
Yes,
the large one confirmed. I continued. Then why did you perceive me as alive?
There is no difference between now and your death,
the large one defended. As I spoke, my wide smile threatened to tear the edges of my lips, despite the unbearable pain pulsating through my body. If that were true, I challenged, my voice tinged with defiance, then you would have never lit that fire. The whispers of the many grew louder as more joined in. The large one took a step back as I continued. You only lit that fire because you perceived me as alive. And the here is where the dead exist. The living don't belong in the here, even if they are soon to die. If they do, then the here ceases to be where the dead exist. So by your own philosophy, you must lift up the living for the same reason you lit that fire. Or else you are nothing but a goddamn hypocrite. The whispers that had taken several seconds to crescendo suddenly died in an instant. All eyeless eyes turned once again to the large skeleton, whose jaw widened ever so slightly, in what I could only interpret as a skeletal face of shock.
She is right.
It spoke quietly in its gravely inhuman voice.
The here is the realm of the dead. The living do not belong here.
The crowd of skeletons erupted in agreement.
She is right. We must lift her up.
She will return properly upon her death. Time is relevant when judging near death and death.
The living do not belong here.
The ancient bones creaked and groaned as they shuffled forward, assembling in a bizarre and eerie display. I could hardly believe it. The dead had been outplayed, and if I could escape back to the surface, I would have another chance at life.
Come with us.
A skeleton urged gently as I began to leave the flickering light of the underground fire. As I made my way towards the group of skeletons, a sudden impact jolted me forward. It was the large skeleton who had collided with me with such force that I had to struggle to remain upright. Despite the searing pain that shot through my body, I managed to keep my footing and looked up to meet the cold gaze of its black eye sockets. For a moment, we stared at one another. That moment passed. In one swift motion, the skeleton drew a sword from its own chest and plunged it through my throat. Through blood-filled eyes, I saw the large skeleton step back, seemingly satisfied with its work. Its cold, gravelly voice echoed in my head once more.
The here is the realm of the dead. The living do not belong here.
My victory was nothing more than an illusion. I was dead before I even hit the ground. The other skeletons, the many, were taken aback by the sudden application of their new philosophy. But after a few moments, they began to shuffle back towards their resting places, muttering amongst themselves.
This is also acceptable.
One said.
We need not move so much this way.
Another agreed. My heart no longer beat, and my body was no longer racked with pain. Even with my eyes closed, I could see the skeletons shuffling past my corpse. Their horrific voices echoed in the cavern as they mindlessly debated, because they had nothing else to do. I tried to scream, but no sound came from my dead lips. The large skeleton loomed over my remains, and I felt truly empty as it spoke.
Do not worry.
It said.
It is difficult to perceive time as I once could, but it should only take a decade until you can talk like us. Within a century or two, you will be able to walk as if you had never been burdened by flesh at all.
My name is Delphine Gael Dubois. I repeated this simple, familiar phrase for years, until it became a foreign sound that eventually disappeared completely from my memory. My name was Delphine Gael Dubois. Now, I am one of many.